Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and a privilege to continue having you join our company here tonight. And we certainly look forward to these discussions because we want to have a look at what's happening in Guyana more from an analytical perspective. There's been a new government in place, as you know. And so tonight we have invited three new faces you might not have seen before in such programs, although they have been around, they have done the talk and walk the talk and talk the walk and everything else. So these three gentlemen have certainly been around in the political scene, but we have not had the privilege of having them in Room 592. And I therefore like to welcome Dexter, George, and Mark France, and Captain Learie Barclay to Room 592 tonight. But before I get to them, ladies and gentlemen, let me just share some information with your hearts, our condolences, our sympathies. So the family of that young man who died today in that horrible accident up at the East Coast. It's a stark reminder, ladies and gentlemen, how short life is. And I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody who's driving on the roadway of Guyana, please drive carefully. There's so much accidents that do not need to occur if we are not in such a rush and if we can be a little careful. My heart goes out to the family, the Puran brothers, that company that would have lost a brother within their employee, and of course, to everyone else that might have suffered one way or another from that accident. Our heart goes out indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also say that tonight there has been a storm in the New York, Queens, Long Island area. And so we know some of our brothers and sisters are picking up some pieces there, literally as we speak. High winds, some things have collapsed. I know that an oak tree would have fallen upon a car and crushed a brother of ours there. And, our heart goes out to them as well. Let me also say to those brothers and sisters who are joining us from the New York area that, we stand with you. You have been standing with us for 5 months. With your thoughts and prayers, and tonight our thoughts and prayers are with you. Our thoughts and prayers also with the brothers and sisters over in Beirut, where, as you know, and this is not in Guyana, of course, I know we have a Beirut in Guyana, but this is, in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, Lebanon, where 2,700 persons were injured and 70 persons died in an explosion there. It's sad to see things like that happen. And of course, it just shows, that as a global village, we must be considerate of what's happening in other countries of the world, because the world has been a friend to Guyana and has been considerate of what's happening here. And now back on the local front, I would like to share with you that we have seen a lot of things. Today is day two of a new government of Guyana. We have seen a lot of things already hitting the airwaves. And most disgusting is probably the right word for this. Most disgusting is the attacks or the persecution that is being done, the racist aberrations that take place, the slanting of events that takes place just because there is another government in office. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all people of this country. When somebody dies, it hurts us all. And we have to start behaving like a mature people that wants to see the progress of this country. I am one that have stood up and said, all of those political persons who you might not agree with me, but it is my belief, if you were on the campaign trail, if you were politicking, if you got your contract renewed anytime after September 30th, 2019, you should know that you should do the decent thing and resign. Walk, especially if you were on a political campaign trail, especially if you were a political person, because you lost the elections. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm seeing a lot of furor being raised about persons being told that they have to go and persons being this and persons being told that. And I would like to ask you all to ensure that let us separate the politicking from politics, from what is natural to justice and what has to happen for a country to move on. And tonight, with that being said, I want to again welcome our three guests and solicit their opinion, what they think of this new government now being in place, and what advice they have for President Ali, what advice they have for the government going forward, especially as three young men, going forward with a new government in Guyana, and also what advice do they have for the people who might now today be in opposition. So we have to take things in perspective, and the objective here, ladies and gentlemen, is not to beat anymore, not to hit anymore, but it is to see how we can heal. It is not a time that I would want to attack anyone. Those days are over. They were over 2 days ago. The wrongdoers or the whole thing about the election impasse is now behind us. We got to build, we got to heal, we got to go forward. Mr. Dexter George, you are part of the political trail, sir, the campaigning. I believe you campaigned for Change Guyana. Of course, you're not here representing Change Guyana, but I said that so that people could know that you were on the campaign trail. And Mr. George, you first. What would be Mr. Dexter George's words to this new government? What's your thoughts having seen after 5 months that we do have a new government in place, sir?
Good evening, Guyana. Just give me a hands up if you're hearing me clearly, because
we can.
I just want to make sure. All right. First, for the new government that's in place, there is a lot of work to be done. They must acknowledge there's a lot of work to be done. They must acknowledge the fact that the Guyanese people needs to see a unified front and not a vindictive or a vendetta moves and all these things, because we are way past that right now. We're heading into basically the last quarter of the year. Most persons know, if you say you're going to open school in September, it's time to get school books, school uniforms for children, and then we just head into the Christmas season right after that. So now is the time not to be worried about politics anymore. It's over. It's time to move forward. We need to see where the damage has been done for the public and how to just recuperate from where we are and move forward. A lot of persons out there are still hurt, are still sad, but this is the time in which persons from the government side, from the opposition side, need to accept the reality and move forward with the country. And this is what I've been telling persons who come in contact with me. Look, we had an election cycle. It was long and drawn out and tedious, and at some points we would say unnecessary, but that's it. We can't run from the fact. But now we need to move forward, and we need to start a healing process, and a unified front needs to be shown. This is what is needed for this country.
Thank you so much, Dexter, and we're going to certainly come back again to you to tap into some of your thoughts as to what might be priority areas. Mark France, you are more or less in the medical sector, sir. Your comments, your thoughts on day two. It's a new government in place. How does Mark France feel about the transitioning of a new government?
Good evening to all of the viewers here on Kaisho Radio. Good evening to all of my Guyanese brothers and sisters. Let me just begin. This is the first time I'm going to be officially congratulating the winners of the 2020 election. This is the PPPC. And with this win comes great responsibility. And it is for them to lead the way. But I also would like to congratulate all of the political parties that would have taken part in the election, and especially those that are going to make up the opposition, because your task is as important as that of the government. So I would like to offer congratulations to the APNO AFC and to the Join the List, of which I am a part, because it is for us as an opposition to hold the PPPC, the new government, their feet to the fire. We need to hold their feet to the fire. We need to constantly remind them of their manifesto and the promises, and that is something that Dr. Franz will be doing would have started already, right? You mentioned health. I am in the health profession, and I think it is probably the most important area, the area that we have to address with most urgency because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic that is currently affecting us. And we really need to get the ball rolling in terms of getting cabinet in place, getting parliament to sit, because we need parliament to enact laws and legislation, and in terms of getting the budget and spendings out there, because we have been running on a shoestring budget, 1/12 of the previous year, and I would have seen how it would have limited the ability of the previous government from effectively addressing the COVID issue. And that is why currently we are facing a new outbreak, especially in those regions bordering our neighboring countries. We've seen today, I think it was 24, 25 new cases. Of that, 17 are from Region 9. We have more in Region 7. Region 1 is the hotspot. So where we may think that we have COVID under control here on the coast, it's a totally different scenario there in those interior regions. And we need the COVID task force to effectively address it. But more importantly, we need a government in place, a Minister of Health in place, someone to ensure that COVID is topmost priority with regard to what we look at. There are many other things that we have to look at, but right now, health and COVID especially, that's the most important.
Thank you, Mark. And let's come to Mr. Learie. Captain, you are probably, you are a unique guy, I must say this. You and, a handful of Guyanese are probably the very few people that would be flying high without having to use anything, right? So, Captain, welcome to 592 again. And what are your thoughts, sir?
Thank you, Yog. Good night, everyone. Good night, Guyanese, and everyone around the world. First of all, I'm extremely relieved that this is finally over. Everyone was sitting marking time, wondering where this was going. And there were times when there was a lot of doom and despair because we were wondering if the wrong would prevail over the right. And to many people, I say this was not a political fight. I would say over the last, since the 21st of December, 2018, a lot of this was not a political fight. There were political manifestations, but it was a fight of ethics and a fight of morality. It was a fight for democracy. And anytime you have a government or any politician who decides not to follow the Constitution, that is the only control, that is supreme control of power. And anytime you have politicians who refuse to follow that, then what we have is anarchy. And anytime you have a situation where votes don't matter, where the will of the people seems to not matter, then we are even worse situation. So there was a lot of doom, but thankfully it is now over. I would say for now, Dr. France is absolutely correct. COVID-19, confronting COVID-19 is a serious issue that needs to be done immediately, and I see steps are being made to confront the issue. It's important that we depoliticize the handling of this issue, that we have a task force or whatever you want to call it, but a supervisory body that's based on science and epidemiologists and people who can manage pandemics and security specialists and transport specialists to actually manage this situation. We need to look at mitigating measures for businesses. This economy, like many others in the world, has been decimated by COVID-19. People are struggling, people are losing their jobs. We need effective leadership in place to be able to deal with these issues. So I'm extremely happy to see that we have a new government in place, a government we can say this is the government. And I'm glad that this ethical fight was finished and the side of the right one rather than the wrong. And I want to say this to people from the side that people would say that lost the elections. Fear is an important tool of politicians. And the boogeyman theories of race are perpetuated every day on the population. And I want to say that the fact that one party is in power doesn't mean people of a certain color will be marginalized, will die, will all sorts of absolute nonsense being peddled around to try to force people into making decisions and putting their support in everywhere other than the issues that matter to them. I would say as you go about your life, you need to look at what makes your life better. How is your life better? What will work for your family? Is there a government creating jobs? Is there a government that is supporting the business sector? And that is one area I would like the new government to look into, to support the business sector, create a level playing field, and provide incentives and the correct environment for business to grow in this country. Because business is what provides jobs and taxes, not governments. Governments collect money, they don't make money.
All right. So indeed, that is right. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that one of the things we will be focusing here in Room 592 over the next couple of weeks and stuff, especially within the first 100 days, is to probably assess and analyze the progress report of a government that now comes into power, because everybody, wants to see what they're going to do. But as I'm sure our guests here would agree, we have a new government that is coming under some severe stresses. And, it is not easy. And as a population, we all want them to do things for so many areas at the same time, simultaneously. For example, people need financial relief. The economy needs to be kick-started, needs to be jump-started, maybe needs to be pushed. Something needs to happen with the economy. COVID-19, as all three gentlemen mentioned, needs to be immediately addressed. So it would be interesting to see how the new government is going to address all of these things. What I can say is that on day one, which is yesterday, of the new government being in place, we would have seen them immediately have large stakeholder interaction with various sectors of the country to talk about COVID-19. So at least we see that what has started to happen is an engagement with the public, engagement with sectorial heads, that is from the private sector and the business sector and all of that, to see what is going to happen. Mark, Dexter, I want to come to you. In terms of, we know that COVID is obviously a very, very, very high priority, right up there, probably priority number one, which it ought to be. From your perspective, young man, Dexter George, what should be probably number two in your mind that a new government should look at, given what we have gone through, given the expectations of the population? What in your mind would probably be number two and number three that they have to pay attention to?
Well, yeah, one need to accept the fact that COVID is priority at most, but number two should be the actual issues of the people that are affected by the outcomes of COVID. For example, those who are unemployed right now because of the COVID pandemic. We need to look at that. How are they going to be financed throughout this system, right? You would notice in various Facebook groups and non-governmental activities that persons are giving out hampers and so forth, and that is coming forward as some form of relief or some form of aid for persons. But we all know that it will not be the end result. Persons will not be solely dependent on that. And we need persons to have jobs, to get to earning, to make money. So we need to start. So my number two thing is to start getting the economy rolling. That's the next thing we need to get going. Once the economy is going, monies and jobs will be generated into this country. So we'll have an ease going on with the COVID guidelines in place.
So you would like to see focus on the economy. And gentlemen, I mean, let's have an interactive session. I don't have to call you. Please, you can either use the button, the button there to put your hands up there on the Zoom chat, or just jump in as you will. Be like what Leonard and I would be the bully anyhow and jump into a conversation. So please feel welcome. Economy is important. Mark, here's one of the thoughts when we talk about economy vis-a-vis COVID, and Learie, you as well. The government obviously is going to be able to attract overseas donor aid, donor financing, and so forth to help with its COVID-19 outreaches. We already see that has started to happen. Mark, I'm directing this to you particularly. Unfortunately, in all the countries of the world, with COVID challenge, the rest of health has taken a backseat. How how important do you see a government now bringing back the rest of the health sector to make it run simultaneously, if not equally, with the COVID-19 concern, sir?
Very, very important question, Mr. Mahadio, Dr. Mahadio rather. Any type of aid currently should be welcomed by the government. We, as Dexter mentioned, we need to focus not only on the health aspect, which has to do with COVID and the lives it is taken and the persons that are ill. We also have to look at the social aspect, how it is affecting persons. And here is where I would like to see the government put in more of its resources in terms of financial resources to ease the burden on who may not have a job, those persons who may be at home, those persons who may have been laid off and are not receiving their full salaries. These are the persons who should be addressed. But also, you mentioned kickstarting the economy. We have to look at ways and means whereby we can have persons who are engaged in whether it is whatever other small business initiative, we still want them to be working. We still want them to be functioning. And one of the ways I think whereby we can address such issue is maybe if we can look at the formation of some committees whereby, for example, food. I have seen many instances whereby farmers, because the markets are half closed and the number of persons going out to the markets are not the same as before, we are seeing currently a lot of food being spoiled on the farms. There should be a system whereby these farm products can be purchased by whether it is a co-op society or whether it's a government agency, something that is formed for the moment, and help to get these foods at a price which is acceptable or a lower price, but try to get it to the population, to the wider population. This is one way whereby we can kickstart our economy because we're maintaining the farmers in terms of them having a market for their produce, and at the same time we're feeding our people. That is one way. Any donor monies that come in, it must be tailored to the people. Other ways whereby the government can help, and the previous government would have probably done some of this, is by consulting with stakeholders, consulting with the lending agencies, consulting with the utility agencies to put a temporary hold on the mortgages and the other loans that persons would have. Maybe you have a 6 month or a 9 month or a 1 year low interest or no interest grant, a grant period. So persons don't have to feel the squeeze in this moment until we can come out of the most severe phase of this COVID. The other thing that I believe that we should do is we should look at the areas that are not as affected and try to ensure that these areas, for example, Region 5 and Region 6, currently we have limited numbers that would have been affected by the COVID pandemic. So we still have to maintain the health protocols and everything that is in play. But we can look maybe if these regions can kickstart the economy while still adhering to COVID protocols because we don't want the sickness, the pandemic to appear in other areas. But these are certain measures, but it involves not only the government, and it involves, I would say it involves more so private sector. And when we're speaking about private sector, we need to include everyone. We have
Right.
seen the previous government at serious loggerheads with some of the major private sector institutions or institutions that represent the private sector. We don't want that. We want everybody at the table. We have to be inclusive. We have to look after the betterment of all Guyanese, and that would mean bringing each and every one to the table to have this discussion. And it needs to happen very, very soon if it has not happened already.
Correct. Thank you. And Learie, I want if you could, you can address the points that we would have discussed, but also if you could also share your opinion. As you know, Guyana has always had what is believed to be a bloated public sector in terms of the numbers of persons employed. I think 1992 government promised a lean, clean, and mean government. But over the years, the public sector continued to be what it is. And remember, as you rightly pointed out, and this is why I'm bringing back the question to you, as you rightly pointed out, there is a productive sector, there is the extractive sector, there is a public sector, and the public sector does not generate, government do not generate finance. The government basically gets its finances from taxes and other forms. Your thoughts on public sector disciplining itself, sir?
The public sector is an extremely important component in the national patrimony. The public sector provides a lot of critical services. These are the support services for the economy, for businesses, and provides a necessary regulatory structure for business to operate within the law and within whatever guidelines and framework they need to operate. The problem with Guyana's public sector is its efficiency and the quality of service that it provides, and also the timeliness with which it provides those services. If you take a dispassionate look at the public sector, we find a lot of wastage, a lot of inadequate or ineffective allocation of resources. You go into public sector offices and some have things they don't need, but way too many do not have exactly what they need to be able to provide the resources. A lot of stuff is locked up in storerooms and back rooms, but people don't have them. So I think that we need to fix that. We need to have a public sector that is private sector oriented in its efficiencies, that somehow is able to be driven by, well, it won't be profit, but some sort of markup that is akin to profit in the private sector. And that is the only way it can be lean, mean, and clean. When you have the mindset that the money will always come, my salary will always come, regardless how inefficient I am, regardless if I don't come to work on time, regardless if I shuffle one paper around my desk all day long and don't get the work done, that is a major problem. But I believe we can fix this with quality control. And that's a major misgiving in the public sector. There are no real strong quality control departments that are really reporting publicly on goals and indicators. Teachers are teaching what percentage of their classes is passing, what percentage of the syllabus is completed. And I'm not picking on teachers. I mean, a teacher is the reason I'm here today. But I just want to use that as one example. Where are the performance indicators of the public sector? And once we can do that and make them public, that's the only way we're going to fix that issue.
And gentlemen, there obviously in your minds, just before I ask Mr. Leonard Gildari to comment, in your mind, gentlemen, there is obviously a lot of pressure on this government. Any new government at this stage, right, would come under, because the expectation of the population is so high. And the expectation, mind you, is not because there is an expectation that a new government will do well, but there is a genuine need in the population, as we talk about the economy, we talk about the COVID-19 threats, we talk about everything you could think of. Do you think, be very pragmatic, do you think that a government under the current constraints Guyana is facing can manage to keep its population expectation to a degree, bring it to a degree of satisfaction? Dexter, you first.
Well, I cannot voicefully say I have the blueprint of what the PPT have for Guyana, but I can make some suggestions, and I hope that it's being adhered to or my advice has been taken into. Now, first, we need to address the pandemic situation, and we need to address the economic situation that Guyanese are facing, right? If you take a model from some countries and you look at what's going on and how they're trying to manage it with the current funding that they're having, we can overcome the situation. Take, for example, right now, we're at the pandemic, and you're hearing talks that there's no monies in the finance ministry that AFC has finished all. These are talks, but it's not proven facts yet for me. So in a situation like this, utility bills are something that should not be paid until we have a stabilized economy. I should say, the PVP should put a hold on persons paying their light bills, paying their phone bills, paying their internet bills, because those monies, persons can use it for other things. Just, for example, just securing food. And it would allow them to stay home, allow them for not to be traveling as much, and allowing a decrease in the spread of the COVID. That's one of the things. The other thing what they can do is redirect functions of certain entities. For example, we have garment manufacturers in this country. We have a garment manufacturer entity that produces clothes for other countries. We can direct them to producing large quantity of masks, because it's already stated that wearing a mask prevents the COVID-19. So these are things they need to put in place. So getting the people to understand what the government has is that they also need to be open to the public. Don't keep a secret meeting and then come out with a plan and then hope that the people would adhere to it, right? Because take, for example, the market situation, where at one point in time, they opened the market for 1 day during the week. And that caused a lot of persons rush into the market to gather enough food stuff. And that was a bad plan. And that's how we saw increase in numbers in Georgetown. There's an example of how we saw increase in numbers in Georgetown. Because everybody works differently. Their times are differently. Not everybody comes off at 12 to 1 for lunch. Some people come off earlier, some people come off later. And all these things need to be taken into consideration. This government needs to be open and transparent with the people right now. They need to just put everything out there. Every single move they're making, the people must know. That's what they should be doing.
Managing expectations is very important. If you're to be a superb leader, if you're to be a top leader, you should be able to manage the expectations of your constituency or of those persons that you represent. In this case, the government is representing the entire Guyana. When we speak about expectations, and this government is coming in with many expectations, and it is because the previous government would have poorly managed the expectations of their constituency, and that is the reason why they're out. They would have promised certain things, important things like constitutional reform, like reaching out to the other side, including them in governance, and they have not delivered. More so, they have been more aloof, and they would have not been in contact with the people as they were supposed to or as they should be. We have seen what they have done in the last 18 months, and it reaped huge benefits. Simple things like reaching out to the populace, and this is what Dexter just mentioned. Simple things like having a listening ear or an open ear. It says a lot. This government may be cash strapped as things are currently, but if everything that they do, they can show that they're being transparent, they can show that they're listening to the people, then even if you cannot fulfill all of the promises in your manifesto, I know the majority of Guyanese, they don't go reading the manifestos of the parties, but there's going to be a flyer there with 10 or 15 promises, core promises that a political party would have made. And the persons are going to remember them. So if you said you're going to reverse this tax and reverse that tax and ease this tax, they're going to hold you to that. Now, what you have to do as a government is, if you cannot fulfill all of those promises that are in your manifesto, be truthful with the people. Be truthful. That is all that they want. They want to see that I could not have done this because, look, the monies that I got, I spent in this other sector, which I considered more important than you can blame me for doing it, but yes, I think that it was more important. And look, it is spent in an honest way, every single cent. We need transparency and we need to get the population involved. I saw you mention the bloated government system. Yes, it is bloated. And it is a sickness of third world countries and more so Latin American countries. We still have to develop the ability to ensure that everyone is pulling their weight, everyone is working, whether it's an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. We simply need to be in, like the example that I would say is to be like the first world countries. We need to develop a system whereby everything should be based on meritocracy. And I have always followed Singapore, and it's the key word from their founding father who would have led them out of the Malaysian coalition and into the country that there is today. You put the best, you put the most brilliant, you put the persons who are working the hardest in those positions to lead and in those positions to shape policies. If you have the best persons, it doesn't matter their race, it doesn't matter their religion, creed, or anything, but if you have the best persons leading there, then we will move ahead a lot faster.
Correct. Thank you for that. Indeed, well said. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we got to look at the signals and the signposts. Learie, in terms of those same points, but also, I want us to also put our minds to the fact that the PPP has returned to government after 5 years. Do you gentlemen think that President Ali will be able to steer his government clear of some of the ghosts of the past, especially the ghosts of corruption and nepotism and cronyism?
That is a point I wanted to speak about. Let me just touch very quickly on expectations and get to that. We have difficulties with the reserves and the treasury. That is a known fact. But I want us to look forward. We've been fed doom and gloom so much for the last 18 months that seems to be the norm. But I'm convinced that that's not the norm. I'm convinced that that's not the future. I'm convinced that the fact that this is now over, this dark age is over, and we've emerged into a new era, that we are in Guyana. Guyana is an oil-producing country. Yes, there's a little lower the demand of oil. Guyana is a gold-producing country. Gold closed today at $2,035 per ounce. Guyana is a major gold-producing and oil-producing country. Guyana is a country that is at the cusp of greatness as we speak. And as we look forward, there are investors lined up as far and farther than the eye can see, who are ready and rearing and who are now climbing over each other to get into this marketplace. Guyana is going to rise. Guyana is going to be great. Guyana is going to be an economic powerhouse. So my expectations as I look forward are that we take this extractive industry, we use the benefits of the extractive industries to invest in sustainable industries, in our agriculture sector, in our other sectors, So, and build those, because at some point oil is going to finish. At some point gold is going to finish. It may not be in our lifetime, but we cannot be selfish and think about our lifetime only. We have children, we have grandchildren, we have great grandchildren, and we have to build a country for them. So my expectation is that we will manage those resources, and we will not look just short term and take money and give to everybody. That is not going to fix our problem. Our problem is that we need to create the economy. The businesses need to grow. The economies of scale need to grow. We need more population. We cannot grow economically on this small population. We need more millions of people in here. We need to be able to bring people. We need to be able to sustain them. We need to be able to stop Guyanese from leaving this country and going elsewhere. So those are my expectations. And oh boy, I forgot the question, the other question. Now that's it.
That's all right. I think Leonard is waiting to get at you guys as well.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen, and good night to you. It's good to have our young people in the house with Dr. Yog Mahadi and ourselves. And good night to all. I want to ask you, gentlemen, based on what you've seen on the ground right now, I think one of the biggest questions that a lot of parents are asking, when is school going to reopen and when is a safe time to do so? And I think, Captain, you would have been flying all across Guyana, seeing what is happening, especially in the hinterland area. And Doc, you would have been seeing what is happening at the hospital there. Are we ready for a September reopening? To you first, Doc, when is a good time to reopen based on what you're seeing right now?
Good question, Mr. Gildari. I would not support any full reopening. It's impossible given what we're currently facing from the COVID pandemic. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm speaking about. This is a personal example, if I may talk about it. My dad got ill recently. He is a retired teacher and he would have been working in Lethem. So he got ill a couple of days ago and he was admitted to the Lethem hospital. Now we know that Lethem is a hotspot. So his sickness is an emergency that merits him coming to Georgetown, the only specialized center to receive full treatment. But because of everything that is happening in the region, it was almost impossible to get him out. And there are many other similar stories like this. Now, coming here to Georgetown, patients who come from the interior, all of the regions that are affected, there is no major control. Captain Learie may say otherwise, but I know that there is no major control of everyone who's coming. So the true number of cases that we may be facing, we don't have a true approximation of it. And it's because of a number of factors, one being limited testing capability, limited reporting, persons not adhering to the rules, and if they feel a sickness, they probably stay at home. So you may have many persons without symptoms but who would have been ill. Now, if you have a population that is mixing and mingling, and our public education sector, we know that the schools and the classes are huge numbers, more than what should be the normal. When a teacher is supposed to probably adequately look at 15 or 20 student max, we know that there are schools with classrooms of 25, 35, or even more. Now, if you're going to have kids mixing in these numbers, if you're going to have them on the roads, if you're going to have their parents dropping them and mixing and mingling, you're making a recipe for a disaster in terms of a health disaster, because it just takes one case. And the same thing would go for any one of the other sectors. We need to focus on probably do it more regionally. Okay, so Region 5, Region 6 are the regions that have had few cases. Region 6 is across a bridge whereby you could control persons who go into the region. You've had 2 or 3 weeks whereby there would have been no new cases or maybe one case. Region 5, you would never had any positive case. Those are the regions that you look. Maybe we can implement restarting classes here for the students and do it in a phased manner whereby you have a morning class for a certain group of students, and then you have afternoon class for another group. So you don't have the huge numbers in the schools. But here in Georgetown and in those other regions that are currently affected, that's a big no-no for me, because it will only help to further proliferate the number of cases. And we would have seen this in countries that would have had control over COVID. And I wouldn't say the US had control, but some states, their numbers were low. And then we noticed Florida and these other states, they opened up. And now we have a new number of cases. And given the fact that we are close to Brazil and there is so much border that we don't control, we have no true idea of what is the total affected population. So we need to be very, very careful. And September is way too close.
Yes, and Captain, somebody did point out, one of our viewers, that is not when we open, but how do we reopen? What kind of education system? Because this is not going to go away in a little while. So that is where we should be focused, and not when, but how should we do it?
I want to endorse Dr. Francis' comments. Um, I don't think we've controlled this well in the areas where there's a there's a lot of population concentration, like Region 4 particularly, and we haven't controlled it well in areas where there's large swaths of border. I think if you went through my Facebook page, you remember me suggesting a long time ago that we prioritize security on the Brazilian border. And yes, the way to do this is through a regional methodology. So the regions that don't have many cases or any cases, they're the ones that are ready to go back to school. But we cannot countenance the possibility of people in Region 9 or region 7 or region 8 or region 4 or 1 going back to school at this point. That is a crazy idea. And that is something we need to treat with in a very sensible manner. As it is, the areas that have acted responsibly and have controlled the ingress and egress in the interior, those areas have done very well in fighting the spread of COVID. Areas like in Baimadai and Camarang, Jawala, these areas have come together and they have put protocols in place. They have closed their village borders to people who have not had negative PCR tests. So for instance, if you're trying to get into Bamada or Camarang right now, you have to have a negative PCR test before you can board that aircraft. Or you're not getting off when you get there. And people that leave the area, they can leave freely. But if they leave the area for 1 day, they have to have that negative PCR test before they return. And they're very serious about that. And those areas don't have any COVID.
I wanted to bring you in a different direction. A little earlier, the issue was raised about the gold price, and we did see it tonight. It's $2,024, $25 thereabouts for an ounce of gold. We have lots of gold in our bag.
Went to $35.50.
And I think you may have been
that was the
looking at
close.
that. Right. But let me just raise that, because here's an opportunity for us to probably capitalize. But then you're dealing with borders that's right open, borders that's hard to manage. How do we deal with gold mining, COVID-19, and a new government?
I think with gold mining, like mining is happening in Camarang and in Baimadai quite safely with no cases of COVID because of the controls in place. It's important that you place the access controls into the area. All the agencies are working very closely together, the Ministry of Public Health, the security sector, the police, and so they work, and the GGMC officers are working very closely. So you can't enter that area from anywhere unless you check in and you have that test. They're very serious about that. And as such, they've been able to capitalize and profit from this spike in gold prices. Whereas other areas like Aranca and the Maruca area, which did not take the time to protect their livelihoods and their health, they're suffering right now because they can't capitalize on this lucrative opportunity right now.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you all as we continue our discussion, we are going to have some timing for an open line. If anybody, please feel welcome. If you want to call in and have a few words to say, a few words to share, especially if you want to send on any congrats or anything to the government of Guyana, of course, it's an open line, so you can do this. Now, Dr. Mark Franz, I have said on this program and on the daytime when Leonard was accommodative of me being, I'm kidding. Mark, I had said that one of the things that Guyana did not do, and Dexter, I'm going to come to you in a second, my brother. One of the things Guyana did not do, Dr. Franz, is we never established a baseline. We never did tests across the country to see how much at risk the population. So we don't know whether we are growing or we have flatlined or because there's just not, what would be your comments with regards to that opinion, sir?
Establishing a baseline, it has a lot to do with resources on hand. Initially, we had limited testing capability and limited testing kits to begin with. So the numbers and the stringent policies that were in place meant you only could have tested certain people. And yes, we were adhering to the World Health Organization guidelines and trying to be as strict as possible. When COVID broke, I'm speaking internationally now, one of the countries that managed it the best, it was South Korea. South Korea decided that because they have the financial capacity that anyone who is entering their country and anyone who would have been exposed to a patient, they're quarantined and they're tested, and they would have been able to control COVID quite effectively. It's one of the best countries in terms of control and COVID. Guyana, on the other hand, our hands are tied. We have limited resources, both financially and personnel. And we also need to put it where it's most needed. And because of that, and I am very sure that the COVID task force and the now incumbent government have woken up to the realization that, you know what, we don't have that much testing capacity or capability. Right. I don't know if they have 2 weeks worth of testing kits, if they're probably testing around 300 kits per day, right? So you have to look to source these materials. And it is only when you have them on hand, then you can adequately do the testing that would give you some sort of baseline. The other important thing is your human resource, because you can be doing testing and then you're doing nothing with that information. And that is why when Learie mentioned that, you know what, we need to get our best and brightest persons involved. We need to get the epidemiologists. We need to get the persons who are au fait with disaster medicine. We need to get the persons who are specialists in their areas, in infectology and all these other areas. Cuba, I was trained in Cuba. Cuba has, well, it's a one-party state and they have more control, and we have seen the same thing with China. Cuba has been able to effectively curtail COVID-19, and it's because of strict policies. They ensure that when the lockdown is down, nobody can go out on the road. They ensure that if you would have been, if you were somebody who would have been in contact with a patient who was positive, then you have to be tested and ensure that you spend your 14 days in quarantine and you cannot come out, and they would have specialized quarantine centers, right? And because of this, we would have seen a reduction in their numbers. Right now, Havana is the only place that got probably 20-something cases that they would have had. And this is coming down from the hundreds, and this is a population of over 12 million. Mm-hmm. If we can take example from such a system, because we need to control our borders, we need to control the population who are out there believing that COVID is still a myth, believing that we don't have to social distance, believing we don't have to wash our hands, believing we don't have to wear a face mask. There is a fellow colleague of mine who travels every day to work, and she takes public transportation, and she mentioned, Mark, you know what? First, they began by having 2 persons in a seat. But then the conductors who are not wearing a mask, the driver who's not wearing a mask decides, oh, you know what? That person is a regular. I got to pick him up. That is my auntie. That is my cousin. And you end up coming down with a full bus load. And because of this, you're exposing each and every one. So you have a bus load of persons not wearing masks. So because of resources, we could not have done what we should have probably done in the first place. However, it is never too late. Now that we have a government in place, now we have a parliament that should soon be in place, and maybe we can look at the budget or a contingency plan, then we need to put more resources. And this is not financial alone. I see Mr. Ali Cock from Region 9 calling for more staff, human resources, old health care professionals, mentioned 37 or 40 of them, asking for them to find a way whereby they can come on. We need to get each and everyone involved so that we can adequately test, we can adequately report, we can do our analysis, and then we can establish belatedly a baseline and work from there so we know what numbers we're dealing with. This thing has
Correct.
to do with statistics all the time.
Of course. Of course. Thank you for that. Dexter, I want to come to you on another completely different topic, my friend. Georgetown, the capital city. As we know, and mind you, ladies and gentlemen, viewers and listeners, the municipalities are not necessarily under direct government control. They're under supervision via minister, but not under direct control, because the municipalities are basically voted into place by the local government election, which will happen next year or ought to be happening next year. Mr. George, under the PPP, the Georgetown City Council had a torrid reputation. Under the APNU ASC, it started off well. Lots of monies were spent on the first month or two or three of cleaning up Georgetown, but from there on, it has been a downhill slide. What's your thoughts with regards to Georgetown is still being prioritized? And this is not necessarily from government top-down approach. This is for the municipalities now.
Well, first of all, public awareness is something that needs to be done. Persons need to take their community by their hand and stop depending on their leaders to do every single thing. Because you have situations where simple garbage collection, persons living in that street, they're not responsible for that. Yes, they say they pay rates and taxes, so they only look forward for when the garbage truck comes and collects it. But there are days when the trucks do not go, and you see garbage in front of your home. Some people leave it. So you need to start taking, if you want to say from a bottom-up approach, the citizens need to start taking their community, their village, their area, their street, their block, if you want to say how you want to call it, by the hand. They need to step out and start doing the things and stop depending on the leaders to come in and do something. During campaigning time, I must say this, I walked around almost 90% of Georgetown. I could probably say I walked around. I didn't drive, I walked, literally walked. And to hear some of the simple complaints that these persons have, and to point it out and said, you know what, why are you waiting on the mayor to do this? Why are you waiting on a city engineer to do this? These are things you yourself you can do. You have engineers living in Georgetown and not being effective right in their own street. And they're waiting on a city engineer to come and do something about it. It's saddening to know. So if you want a top bottom up approach, you need to let the people be aware that, you know what, they can take responsibilities, they can start doing things with it. Because if you keep your house clean but your yard dirty, what does that say? That's the first thing you need to look at. And then once you have those effects, you can make your demands going forward. That's what we need to do, right? So in a situation, let me just bounce back, because I was kind of quiet in the whole COVID discussion. For the schools, especially in the city, people need to realize that not every child is being dropped off by their parents in a private vehicle. We have what was implemented by Granger, the school buses. And if you look at those David G buses, the amount of children that are packed in those buses, then you have private persons who do school pickup and drop off. The amount of children are packed in those buses, they do not sit separated. They're packed in those buses because parents find that, okay, these bus services for dropping off my children to nursery, to daycare, to primary, to secondary is a bit um, money saving. So they allow the children to go in these packed buses. So if you're going to look at a COVID situation where distance is necessary, how are you going to be taking your children to school? How are these children are going to be going to school? You need to take that into consideration as well. So it clearly shows that from a transportational point of view, you getting your children to school is already putting them at risk. What when they reach the school, you don't know what's going to happen because you have cases where children are living in region 3 and attending schools in region 4. You have cases where children are living in region 10 attending school in region 4. These are known facts. So if region 3 becomes a hot spot and you don't know which child, relative, parent, aunt, uncle that they have been come in contact with, and then they now cross the river and come into a school. You see what I'm talking about here? The infection will be skyrocketing. So these are all systems that needs to be put in place.
Mm-hmm.
We look at it.
Thank you for that. Dexter, I wanted my next question to the entire panel here, starting with you, is this notion of persons in this new government. I want to come back to the government. This notion of persons being let go. So there is news circulating that, for example, persons within the Ministry of Presidency and other areas and so forth may have, I'm not so sure, but they may have been requested, some of them, to resign their post. I understand that one gentleman would have said he's been asked to leave the government-owned premises, and he has complained about it. What is Dexter George's reaction to these requests for persons to resign their posts or to give up the government-owned? And gentlemen, I want to come around to all of you on the same question for your opinion. Dexter, you first.
You first.
All right. In relation to persons giving up their government posts, I say giving up their government posts and not being asked or fired from their post, because one thing you need to look at in a situation, I'm not talking about ministers, PSs, and junior ministers. I'm just talking about normal employees. If they are effective at their job and they're doing it well without fear or favor, then they should not be targeted. That's my honest opinion on that. But if it's proven fact that these persons are being biased, are being politically motivated in their job field, then they should give up their job, because that's not what we need in a Guyana going forward. And I'm going to give you an example of what I experienced in the transition from PVP to APNU AFC in 2015 to 2020. Persons were ecstatic that, okay, APNU AFC is now in power. And if you could remember, there was this statement, it's we time now, it's our time now. And persons lobbied that hard in the workplace. And you could clearly see the biasness that was being played out. It's our time now. It's we time now. This is what you keep hearing, right? And I had a confrontation at a time with a APNU AFC supporter. I should say a die-hard supporter. And at the end of the confrontation with him and myself, his words were to me, it's young people like you that's going to make APNU AFC lose power. But the thing is that in his conversation with me, all he was just doing is pushing the APNU AFC narrative and not looking at the objective of what we were discussing. It's a workplace. Certain things need to be put in place. Certain issues need to be addressed. Why does it have to be political? Not every workplace needs politics to be involved in it. Because going to the hospital, does it matter to a doctor if you're a APNU supporter, if you're a PVP supporter, and you're in a case of an emergency? That's what people need to start putting in place. And these comments that a lot of people have, okay, PvP is back in power, so it's PvP time now. So just use what I'm saying as an example. If you have a doctor who voted for APNU AFC and you go in there, okay, it's PvP time now, and he refused to treat you, what is going to be your situation? So there's no time and place for politics in a workplace. If you are doing your job without fear or favor, there should not be no discrimination against it. But if you are doing your job just because of a political guideline, then in a situation like that, measures should be taken. That's my view on it.
It comes back to the problem that our public sector has. All of these persons that you're speaking about, they are, if they're not contract workers, they're pensionable, they're on the pensionable scheme. But I'm thinking mostly those who might be going or asked to leave, they're contract workers. I saw the editor-in-chief of Chronicle deciding that he's going to take his leave and then he's not coming back. The problem that we have is the system whereby we have, and the words that you mentioned, favoritism, nepotism, cronyism, whereby when a government takes over, if it's a specific political party, they tend to bring in what they call their own, as Dexter is mentioning, and not necessarily the best person for the job. There are rules and regulations in place in how we deal with public sector workers. So the example that you mentioned of Ganesh Maipal, the acting general manager of Chronicle, being asked to leave the government property, I saw his post, in 3 days, that is certainly going against the rules, because there is protocol in place that, okay, if you're asked to leave, they should be given a certain time. If it's a month for you to find a separator, a new lodging, then that is what should happen. If it looks as if you are targeting specific workers, then that is not a good, you're not giving a good front. You're not showing a good front, because what you need to do is to bring everybody on board and get them working to the best of their abilities to push the Guyana agenda forward. You don't want to push the PPPC's agenda or the APNU AFC's agenda or ANUG's agenda.
Right.
You push
But Dr.
Guyana
Frank,
forward.
let me push it back to you in the following way, for your opinion. So in the case of the gentleman you just mentioned, I think the rules also say, but if you were terminated or retired or stuff like that, you get 72 hours or something like that, within which you must vacate the premises. But the bigger question is, a person who becomes a contract worker within the last 3 months, your boss knew you lost the election. The entire basis upon which the contractor and the contractee enter the contract might as well be no basis, a basis upon which nothing good can exist. What then? And should the taxpayers continue to bear that burden then? Because remember, at the end of the day, it's taxpayers funded.
I want to jump in here on this one, if I could.
Okay, okay.
This is an interesting topic. Go ahead.
Let Dr. Franz finish first.
Let Mark finish.
Yeah, Learie. So, as I mentioned, we have rules and regulations in place, and the incumbent now, they would have spoken and said that, all of these deals that are being cut, all of these contracts that are being signed, we're going to revisit them. And they have that right to revisit each and every one. And if there is any foul play with regard to that deal that was made or that negotiation that was made, then we have the right to take it to the courts. And we have taken all matters for the past 18 months to the court. It might take a while. It might, if you make an arbitrary decision right now, it might affect some people, but they have that right. If you fire someone, if you terminate someone's contract, they can challenge you in the court. And we have lived up to listening to our judiciary. And that is something we should be thankful for, all of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I hear you, Mark. I have this to say on that issue. There are critical people in critical places that are necessary for the advancement of any leadership agenda. And there are tons of very good and honorable public servants who, with the limited resources that they usually have, do an excellent job every day and really push and put in the work. But let me say this, if you are involved in political victimization, if you are involved in persecution of people for political purposes at the behest of political bosses, if you are involved in peddling propaganda using state resources, if you are involved in providing compromised information to support democracy, then go home. When your side loses, go home. And no one has any sympathy for you if you're sent home. Now you know the political situation. You know the results of the elections. You know the agenda you're trying to push. And you're going to accept a job and government lodgings within the last few days? You're a madman to do that. You have to be a madman to do that and think that's a sustainable position as a job. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and it, for me personally, again, this is my personal view, and let me just say this, Leonard would probably speak on behalf of Kite Show Radio and Kite Show News. I would take your side here, Learie, because from my perspective, it speaks of integrity, decency, professionalism, and honesty. And why I'm raising that is from the following perspective, especially if you entered into a contract after the election. In fact, even after September 30th, when the CCJ said, you are a caretaker government, when President David Granger said to this public, an undertaking to not enter into public contracts, to not get the government involved into anything that will not be done under a caretaker government. Yes, back to you, Dr. Franz.
But before he go there, this is interesting, if I may. If Miguel Learie is working at a place that, and I think coming back to 2015, we did see, and gentlemen, we did see some officials who were sitting even as chief executive officers within some state institutions were candidates and they were actually on the platform campaigning. I think when the new government comes in, and you mentioned certain words, I would say it's even immoral for you to be sitting there in the office after the new government comes in, knowing that you would have lost. But a good point was also made that if after March the 2nd that you would have seen a couple of things, maybe the statement of polls, made their conclusions and then still went on to challenge it and still want to stay in after the new government comes into play, you have a big issue there. But there are, and let us cut to the chase, there were a number of people who were still sitting in state companies, openly campaigning. For example, Shara Duncan, one. Two, Ganesh Mahipal, and these are people that I know. Christopher Jones is the director of sports. What do you say to that? Directly, the people of Guyana are asking, could you sit being paid and then, of course, openly campaign like that while you're being paid? Because I'm not sure what kind of work would you be doing if you're sitting in those functions at that point in time.
So the Constitution itself speaks something to public workers going on a candidates list, right? And the general trend is that people have not paid attention or enough attention to it, whereby you're not supposed to be in public office if you're going on a candidate list. I am someone who has been totally against this. My take is this: if you can be working in a public office and you're given your due diligence, you're given your 8 hours or your 12 hours or how much not, and it is not affecting your extracurricular activities, it's not affecting your position, it's not affecting your work, then it is your right as a citizen, and I know this is something that can be challenged in the court, it's your right as a citizen to support and be a part of any political organization you choose, right? Mm-hmm. Some persons might argue otherwise, but it is still to be proven. The names that you mentioned, what we should look at is if during this period, if they would have been performing their tasks adequately, because we would have seen those persons being long hours on the campaign. So it's up for those who are in now to probably go back to the records and question. And I don't know how good is our record keeping, but that is an argument again that can go both ways. And that is my position. For example, I have close friends who would have been acting as regional health officers. See, this is big positions because they're in charge of health for a region. Regional health officers, and they would have been on the campaign trail. Has it affected their performance on the job? That is the big question.
Well,
And
I'm
I
not
think
sure, Mark.
not
Mark,
that much.
if I may, I could remember in 2015 there was a lady by the name of Elizabeth Harper, Director General in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She resigned to become a candidate. If you're sitting as a candidate and you campaigning in the platform, I think I can't remember what it was, but I'm almost sure that the regulations have something that is stated exactly. But I do hear your point.
Yeah, and Lennox spoke about this issue, Lennox Schumann. Lennox Schumann wants the Canadian system that we have, and you follow it to a T. If you're going on a political platform, if you're going to campaign, if you're going to be on the list, the candidates list, then the right thing, this is his expression, is that you should resign from any government portfolio that you have. Wait out until the campaigning period is finished, and then if afterwards you want to resume your work, if the government or whoever's it wants you because you bring skills that no one else has and they need it, then so be it, right? This is another approach that how we can look at it, because in the end we need to have, as I have always mentioned, our best and our brightest there working for the betterment of our country. It does not matter which political party or which organization you come from. That is my humble belief.
Well, Mark is perfectly correct there in terms of doing a job and having your right to political choice and the right to campaign. That is a right everyone else should fight for. I just want to make it clear that my issue is if you're involved in the taking a state media and turning it into propaganda. That is my problem. You're taking state dollars and turning it into, because you're a political person, and turning this state into a perverse institution. That's the problem. Go home then. A normal person, no problem. Normal person do the job fine, campaigning fine. But people who are doing that, victimizing people on behalf of a political, persecuting people. Those are the people. Go home.
Learie, let me ask this question, and Mark, you can jump in first. If Captain is working in any job, in any of the ministries as a public servant, and while there as a public servant, he starts to also earn a salary unknowing to his masters from a private sector that is in direct competition, or that might be insider trading. Should Mr. Learie still stay on the job, even though he is performing his job effectively and efficiently? His job doesn't suffer.
If Mr. Learie has an ounce of decency in him, he will walk and go to that job, which is bringing his job into disrepute, right? That is a totally understandable position that I would take. And this is why I have refused on the campaign trail to speak much about public health, although it is the area I work in and I probably know a lot more than the other areas. I have chosen to remain quiet on public health and some of the major issues that we face that can directly bring my position into disrepute, or it can be contradictory because I work in that sector. So indeed, if you mention that Learie is working in a position and he has what might be termed inside information and he is making profits or he's gaining off of it, then he is clearly flouting his job responsibilities and what is expected of him, right? So if Learie has any decency, and if anyone has any decency, he will go. When you mention the issue with the state media, now this is something that we know has affected both sides, and it is because whoever has been in power has used the state media as their scapegoat to do as they please. And it has become partisan. It has probably been under the ownership of whoever's in power. What we need to do is to ensure that state media remains independent, that although oversight comes from Parliament or the government or whichever agency is in charge. We need to ensure that whoever is put there, whoever is directed and working, ensure the independence of state media and other such companies. That is the only way we can be able to ensure that whatever comes out, no matter who is in government, is reflective of the wishes of the population or the general population, not of a political party.
And if I may,
Right.
gentlemen, if I want to comment back here, Ganesh Mahipal, because this is something that is maybe going to come back in the next 5 years to haunt us. He's sitting there as the assistant or acting GM of the Guyana Chronicle, and Yog in the past would have called it the Guyana Rag. I'm not sure whether he is calling it the same thing, but
Well,
he's sitting his
I have said I will wait and see. Let me see what
right.
they do. If they continue being a political piece, then, you know.
But
Anyway, go on.
let's
Sorry.
see what happens. But his name was also as part of the recent court. I think the recent court battle. This last one that went all the way to this court of appeal. So,
Mm-hmm.
my question to you directly, and I think we did answer it in parts, but I would like to hear back. In the case of Ganesh Mahipal sitting over there at the state-owned media, would have been used as some people viewed it as a weapon against all Guyana, misuse, abuse, whatever you want to say. New government comes into place, knowing that you are also part of a court case, and you're still sitting there. Whether there's rules that govern your ability to be able to campaign on a political platform or not, do you think it's moral for you to be still sitting there, or it's right for you to still be sitting there as the acting GM of the Guyana Chronicle after new government comes in?
This is for me or anybody.
Anybody want to answer? It's an open field today.
Morally, probably it might not be right. I'm not so sure about the information that Ganesh was involved in a court case. I tend to remember the names of the persons that were put forward. Maybe you can refresh my memory.
He was a
But
part. He was a named party in this last case, right, Leonard? He was a named party.
Yes, I'm going to try to bring it back, but somebody just pointed, and
Yeah.
I remember that his name came up
I
in
think
it.
it had to do with the affidavit of one of the other litigants, and he was mentioned as having worked and offered information. So it was not being a named party per se. But again, he was involved to some extent.
Still, the question is
My
on the
answer
table.
to this is morally, it may not be right for him to continue, especially if the substantive position that he has would have been conformed within the last couple of months, or even if you're looking going back all the way to the no confidence motion, where we're questioning the ability of the government of them to effect contracts and to sign into certain contracts. But we have to balance not only what is right and wrong, but also look at the humanist perspective. Because are we going to be taking bread out of the mouth of a man and a family and of someone who, because of who he is, may spin it? And we know the Apno AFC, they're masters of spin, may spin it in a direction whereby they can galvanize their supporters to see it as, you know what, this is political prosecution. And this is what they have always done, and this is what they're doing now. We need to be very careful. For example, the Mingo issue, and I have my own way of dealing with things. I believe that if GCOM had decided to bring back Mr. Mingo at the recount and put him in front of a station and put him in front of the boxes that he would have had his persons read out and get those different reports, you incriminate him right there. You shame him right there. And that is some way I see whereby we can deal with such things. So if you force, if the contract that Ganesh has is legal and he continues in his position, if you force Ganesh to work for his dollar, work for his next meal, doing honest work and doing the government's work, the newspaper work, the country's work, what is the big issue? Right? But again, that is only my personal view.
I was bringing it.
Dexter, feel free to jump into, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
go on,
yeah,
Leonard.
yeah.
That is something I would want to.
Go ahead,
That's
Dexter.
was something I was mentioning earlier. That if you're doing your job without fear or favor, then you should not be targeted. So there's something that they probably need to review. Is Mr. Maipal an effective GM at Chronicle? That's the first thing you need to look at. is he effective in executing that duty? If he is, then by all rights, he should stay on. But if you're find and you have the proof that he's not, then you have to look at his contract. How many is it up? How many months is remaining? What are the terms of the contract? Because uh, terminating somebody's contract without due cause can lead to serious implications, and that you need to look at. So you just can't come and say, okay, we're in power now, and we noticed that you were not in agreement with us. You need to go home. Because if that is such the case, then half the working population will be going home.
Well, you got to look at it. I think what Leonard was getting at too, and to use the case of the media. Remember, look, you can publish something, you can never unpublish it. It's there, it's gone, it's done. You can thereafter produce a retraction, but in political seasons, people are just they're gonna forget that there was a retraction and they're just gonna take it. So I think also the sector is important. But gentlemen, I gather, and it's been a great conversation to have here. This conversation has to continue because we gotta now see how we can evaluate not just the government's performance, but the challenges that the government will face. You look at the performance of the last government, the performance of the previous 2015 government, and you have to now see whether this current government will be learning from all its predecessors, as well as whether President Ali will be learning from both the good and the bad in terms of David Granger and his team. Now, we are at program time, and I guess we are going to take a wrap at that. But it has been good to have you gentlemen here tonight, and I must say that the conversation has been very engaging. I would want to ask you one last question if Leonard Gildari can permit it.
Take all the time you want, sir.
Okay, great. So Mr. Learie Barclay, Mr. Dr. Mark France, and Mr. Dexter George, we undoubtedly are going to have a next couple of weeks where every single act of the government will be viewed through the lens of victimization or not. Every single act. The elephant in the room, the proverbial elephant in the room, the big thing we have in Guyana is obviously the race card, the race divide, the race issue. How, in your view, should the government now move ahead, knowing that it has these two double whammies? One is that anything will be viewed from the perspective of race, and two, it will be viewed from victimization. And in your closing, what is your advice to Dr. President Irfan Ali, sir?
First, I did take the opportunity to congratulate Dr. Mohammed Ali on his election to President of Guyana. He's fought a long and hard fight since no confidence motion. It's been 18 months. It's been way too long, and it's hard for me to understand what was gained. I mean, I 18 months extra in office, but I think a lot more was lost, unfortunately. And it's a travesty because Guyana needs a strong opposition. There's this call for government of national unity, but the government of national unity is a government that unites against the people. We need a strong opposition. And I sincerely hope that APNU, AFC is able to regroup and become a strong opposition that holds the government accountable.
Correct.
That said, I think the way forward for President Ali is to be as inclusive as possible, honest, and very accessible. I was heartened by the fact that he held a press con where he was able to answer questions immediately upon his inauguration, and he's been inaccessible since. He needs to be upfront about everything, and he needs to be honest, and he needs to be transparent in all of his dealings, and he needs to understand that there are 217,000 people who may not have chosen him at this point, but he needs to win over those people by taking care of them. There were a lot of allegations in the past of skewed allocation of resources and opportunities, and based on color of skin. But I'm heartened by the fact that, I mean, I passed through Rough Street shortly after the inauguration, because I was driving around looking at the mood of the political parties headquarters, and I saw about 50% of the people who were there are people that look like me. So this notion that the PPP is a party of a particular race, I didn't see that. I saw everyone, people celebrating there outside of Freedom House. And it was actually very heartening to me. So I think there will be elements within the party who will want to continue with the old ways, like they are in the other parties that put the PPP out of power in 2015. But he needs to successfully curtail those elements and ensure that their state's resources are allocated evenly. All sectors, he may even have to reach out a little more. And that's the only way forward. And to be able to curtail those people who have those proclivities to say, hey, not anymore. That's not going to happen. We're not doing it that way anymore. We are a party of the people.
Okay. Thank you for that. Dexter, I'm going to come to you last, Mark, because I have another question for you particularly. Dexter, your advice or your words to the new president, and of course, your closing comments, sir.
The fact that you brought the race question now, persons need to realize that racism does exist in Guyana. You shouldn't run from it, you shouldn't hide from it, but you should address it. And that's an issue that needs to be to the forefront. It needs to be put out there. And let's have discussions on it. And on the way forward, attitudes of persons needs to change, right? So in workplace, church, school, all of these areas can be used to address these issues. There are a lot of persons out there who are hurt on both sides of the divide, and President Ali has the opportunity now to step out. And one of the things he has the opportunity to do is to step out and engage the public, engage Guyanese people, and show that there is a need for unity, and show that there is a need to discuss the way forward, and not use persons as representatives. Because we have situations where you could ask somebody to go and do something, and then they go and do something racially motivated. They send a wrong narrative. So it's imperative of the president to make sure that all the persons who he appoints, who he selects, who he puts in place to lead this country forward are working in unity for the Guyanese people. And I keep saying Guyanese people because we're not going to only address the two major races. We have 6 races, and then we have the 7th, the mixed race people, right? So everybody needs to be looked at as a single unit. So we need to have that out there. We need to have it addressed, because you've traveled to many countries, I would assume. And when you have discussion with foreigners and you tell them that, look, there are so many different ethnic groups living in Guyana, one of the questions persons would ask, how do you coexist like that?
Correct.
And when you explain to them that your neighbors are of this cultural belief, your neighbors are of this ethnic race, and you see that shock on their face because they can't believe it. So Guyana has a gem of itself, and we need to preserve it. We need to let people know that racism, yes, does exist, but we need to get rid of it once and for all. That's the way forward. And we have a young president, a young, understanding president now. We're not in the era of Burnham, and we're not in the era of Jagan. I said it on my Facebook page that the era of Burnham and Jagan died in the courts. It died. We need to move away from that. So to be honest, from today going forward, if somebody's going to be telling me, oh, Burnham did this and Burnham did that, and they have a racial narrative behind it, you need to come forward to the future. That's what you need to tell people. We're not in a racist country no more, and this is what we are looking forward for. And if you don't address those people, they will continue with their racist ways. So it needs to stop. And as a president who is somebody for the people, because most people who try to engage with him before him becoming president, they say, you know, he's an easygoing guy. I had the opportunity to speak to him on a few occasions, and it's easy for you to talk to a president who can relate to the current situation, right? And this is what his party loyalists should do. Follow that footstep. Be relatable. Address people's needs over their race. Address people's financial situation over their race. In relation to the workplace, especially workplace, it's very, very, I don't want to use a harsh word, it's very tense going forward, because a lot of persons are in this fear, okay, because I'm of this race, I will be replaced by someone of another race because of this party's in place. That's a situation, that's a hard fact that played out many times before.
That's right.
And what happened, yo, when you do that, you take somebody who is skilled. I'm not talking people who are politically motivated. I'm just talking persons who are, just because of their race, they're removed. That skill, that training, that education that person have in executing that job is being replaced by somebody who has no business being there. And guess what? That entire organization crumbles just because you want to suit a racial narrative. This is what happened way before, and even in 2015. So that needs to stop. And going forward, yo, what I'm going to say is this. If you're going to a workplace, address the work performance of the people working there. If you realize they're not doing their job and they're just there for the politics and politicking, then yes, they should go.
Correct.
But if they are effective in their job, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that, indeed. And Dr. Franz, thank you so much too for your thoughts and so forth expressed thus far in the program. Your closing thoughts, your words to Dr. Ali, and you know, what would be your final thought? My question to you: what would be your final expression, basically on the same brouhaha that is now emerging with regards to persons overseas making a lot of pot shots on Granger and Simona Brooms and Cameron Ramjata, and Mr. Burke has been making the airwaves, cursing them out, calling them out, and bringing up to them a lot of disfavor. And I believe, you know, locally, some of the political persons like James Bond and so forth would tell him, man, stop this public attacking of the political leaders. My question to you, Dr. Franz, is at the end of the day, don't you think that APNU AFC's leadership needs to talk reconciliatory language with the population in a more active manner, sir?
Political currency. One phrase or two words to describe everything that happened from the no confidence motion to now. The opposition and its leaders specifically, the opposition now, because they're part of the opposition along with the joint list. Their leaders have allowed the great expectations and hope that the entire Guyanese populace had in them to diminish, to be watered down, to be almost non-existent now because of their decisions and because of their leadership style. So President Granger is not to be blamed entirely for everything that has happened to APNO AFC. President Granger has been a man of his word. Whether or not he had a hand in other decisions, that is up to question. I totally believe now that President Granger was part and parcel of everything that happened. But he has always stood by his word in saying that, you know what, I'm going to wait on GCOM to make a declaration, and I'm going to abide by that declaration. Others found ways and means whereby they could have prolonged the entire fiasco. And because of that, it has taxed their leadership, so much so that I can safely say that the entire upper echelon of the APNO AFC, they have no political currency currently. And that is why there may be, if there isn't already, a significant battle for that top leadership position of whatever remains of the APNO AFC, whether it remains as a coalition or whether it goes back to the PNC or it comes with a new name. There is a significant battle there. And the actions of certain persons who have quite a huge following, the Rickford Barks, the Sharon Duncan and Christopher Jones and all these people, it has caused persons who looked at them differently to not want to believe in them. And if you want to go forward, you need unity. And right now, as much as the APNO AFC claim that they have unity or we have to unite, there is no unity. The attacks, the simplistic and juvenile attacks that we see coming from persons, especially those overseas, those who would have been calling for them to go on the streets and protest and all these things, and it's because they're living the confines of their North American homes and they're not here suffering with the people on the ground, so they can call for anything. Those persons should have no say anymore in what happens with regard to APNO AFC or the PNC for that matter, right? Because you were not on the ground here, you were not doing anything, you were just being a loudmouth, especially someone like Rickford Burke. So going forward, my belief, and I have said this openly many times before, for the APNO AFC to have that rise as a credible political organization, whatever name they choose, that new rebirth as a phoenix of a party, they have to choose someone who is untainted, someone who is new, possibly someone from outside of the inner confines, someone who is not stained by everything that has happened. Because if you look at it, the entire top brass, the Joe Harmons, the Lawrences, the Aubrey Norton, all these people who are going to be vying for that leadership position and possible leadership of the opposition, they're tainted. Their political currency is below what it should have been, right? The second-tier leaders, the James Bond and Duncan and Jones and these kind of people, are they good enough after everything that they would have supported to be able to unite that base? And we know they have a strong base, 20-25% of persons who are dedicated to the party. That's the advantage that they have over small and newer parties like ANU, like the LJP, Liberty and Justice Party, and the other parties out there. They have a base, and we have to respect that, because it doesn't matter who is chosen to represent them. Those persons must adequately represent that base, that 25 to 30% of the Guyanese population who voted. We know the other swing voters, they may probably think differently. And that is why the current government, the key word for them is reassurance. They would want to reassure the entire Guyanese population, but more so the dejected APNO AFC supporter, that, you know what, we are here for you. We are here as much for you as we are for any other Guyanese. And by doing that, by reaching out, by being inclusive, they will be able to get the confidence of that bloc who is quite disillusioned in their leaders and disillusioned in politics and Guyanese, the whole electoral system. That is how this government can tackle it. And it is a job that is very hard. But I strongly believe that this current government would never, and it's a PPPC, it would never go back to what it was pre-2015. Why I am so strong in my belief is because there has been an evolution in terms of the opposition. The opposition over the last 5 years has held the APNO AFC to their word. They have held their feet to the fire. And guess what? It's 31 and 1. And I came out of a meeting this afternoon whereby the TNM, the LJP, and ANUG met, and we said that, you know what, the LJP will have the first stint in the seat, but you have to represent the entire joint list, the entire Guyana, even if it is from that one seat. And in our little voice that we have through that one seat, we will be holding the PPPC to all of their promises. We will not do like what the AFC did. We will ensure that we will be putting forward amendment to the law so that we can benefit all of Guyana. We can't, from 2006 to now, they have not put forward anything, and that's why they are such a disgrace to their supporters and maybe might be non-existent. This is the difference that we have to make.
All right.
I saw, just one second, I saw, and Learie mentioned something, and this is the only thing I will not agree with him with. He mentioned that a national unity government unites against the people. Learie, this is the only thing I'm going to disagree with you for the night, because ANUG's model, our Guyanese version of the Swiss model for a national unity government, will surely benefit the entire Guyana. And that is something that we're going to be pushing for, to have that voice and to ensure that the opposition, the combined opposition, is listened to by whoever is in government, and our policies that we put forward are put forward to benefit the entire population of Guyana.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mark Franz, Mr. Dexter George, and Captain Learie Barclay. It's been an interesting discussion, and certainly we got to continue this conversation, especially with what Dr. Franz just concluded with. That is the discussion about, united governance structure, national, you call it whatever you will. There are so many people in this country that has so much variations in what they interpret. A national, a united government, or a national front government, or even the talks of inclusive governance and stuff like that. It's all different, mind you, people. So we got to have those discussions. It's been great to have you all here. Mr. Leonard Gildari, any closing thoughts, sir?
Yes.
Because I'm not going to be with you now. I have to defer to you.
All right, gentlemen, I apologize, but I got to run after another appointment.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
it was great. It was great, guys. It was absolutely great. And I'll
Thank
be
you.
back sometime.
We are wrapping. Just
All right, so I got to run. Take care, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Yoga, very quickly, one in conversation that I would like to see, and this is coming from Dr. Mark Franz, something that he said that triggered my mind about the role that the third parties. I would like to talk about the role of the media generally in Guyana, and of course we could relate it to the elections, to the just concluded elections, and see where it goes there, because it's something we're not talking about traditional media anymore, talking about social media here too. So it's something to also introduce. But tomorrow we're going to be back at 1:30 with Wake Up Guyana. That's what it is. That's a new show. After Yoga would have unceremoniously exited himself.
No, it's time. My job there was done, Leonard. So it's
Yes.
time to leave you youngsters to run with it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been good to have you here in room 592. And let me say again, thanks to Mr. Dexter George, Dr. Mark Franz, and of course, Mr. Captain Barclay, who had to leave. So it's been good to have you all here in room 592. Do stay safe and have a great rest of the evening with your family, wherever you have joined us from. And remember, as I say every night, ladies and gentlemen, do a prayer for this country. It is still the best country in the world. Remember, tomorrow night, we will be having Mr. Leonard Gildari here, and our guest will be Mr. Freddie Kisoon in room 592 tomorrow night. So I will be looking forward to seeing you joining our company tomorrow night at 7:30 in room 592. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a safe night. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.